Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into the latest Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, the 2025 edition. It's the 18th year they've done this.
That's right. And it's packed with data, as always. Gives us a real snapshot of the cybercrime scene.
And this year's snapshot seems bigger. They looked at a huge number of incidents.
Yeah, massive. Over 22,000 security incidents analyzed, and they confirmed, get this, 12,195 data breaches. That's the most they've ever analyzed for a single report.
Wow, okay. So definitely not slowing down then.
Not at all. The volume seems to be climbing.
And this data comes from Verizon's own research group, VTRAC, but also lots of contributors worldwide, right? And public sources too.
Exactly. It's a global effort covering incidents from, I think, 139 countries this year. Really comprehensive.
So our goal here is to pull out the key stuff for you. What are the big threats? Who's behind them? And, what can we actually do about it?
Precisely. The report even has this visual spine graphic showing the shift in incident patterns from last year to this year. A nice touch.
It really highlights how collaborative this whole thing is. So many partners feeding data in.
Absolutely. And the way they make sense of all that diverse data is, well, it's crucial. It's the VIRUS framework.
VIRUS. Okay, I've heard of it. Vocabulary for event recording and incident sharing.
That's the one. Think of it like a common dictionary for security incidents. It lets us normalize everything so we can do proper statistical analysis, compare apples to apples,
Makes sense. So what are the core bits of VIRUS we need to grasp?
Well, you've got the threat actor, basically, who did it, external bad guy, internal employee, maybe a partner.
Yeah, the who.
Then the threat action, the what? What tactics did they use? Malware, hacking, social engineering, misuse of privileges, simple error, even physical stuff.
Got it. Who and what?
And then it gets more granular with variety. So under hacking, the variety might be, say, SQL injection. Or under malware, it could be ransomware.
Ah, okay. More specific labels.
Exactly. There are other elements too, like vectors, how they got in, and motives why they did it, like financial gain or espionage.
But the key thing is consistency, right? So you can track trends.
Precisely. That structured data is gold for comparing year over year across industries, across the globe. If you want the real nitty-gritty, the VIRUS details are all open source up on GitHub and virusframework.org.
Good to know. And just quickly, the report defines an incident versus a breach, right? An incident compromises security, but a breach means data definitely got out to someone unauthorized.
Correct. An important distinction. They also use NAICS codes to sort victims by industry. Helps with the analysis.
Okay, foundation laid. So where does this 2025 report start showing some big changes?
Right away, actually. Exploitation of vulnerabilities. It saw a really significant jump as the way attackers first get in.
How big a jump?
It hit 20% of breaches as the initial access vector. That puts it nearly neck and neck with using stolen credentials, which has been the leader for ages.
Wow, 20%. So patching vulnerabilities is becoming even more critical.
Absolutely critical. It was a 34% increase from the previous year's report.
What's driving that increase? Is it specific kinds of vulnerabilities?
Yes, mainly 0 days. Those are the ones the vendor doesn't know about yet, so no patch exists initially. And they're targeting edge devices and VPNs much more.
Edge devices, like firewalls, routers, stuff at the network perimeter.
Exactly. Those devices, plus VPNs, saw an almost 8-fold increase as exploitation targets. Went from about 3% of vulnerability exploits to 22%. That's a huge shift in attacker focus.
8-fold. Okay, that's alarming. So keeping that perimeter locked down is priority one.
It really has to be. And it's not just the exploiting part, it's fixing them too. The report found only about 54% of these vulnerabilities were fully fixed within the year.
Only half. And how long did it typically take?
The median time to remediate was 32 days. That's over a month, on average, that the door is potentially open.
A month. That's a long time in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
It connects to that section they titled Living on the Edge of the Exit, right, with the Camus reference.
Yeah, the Sisyphus analogy. It really captures that feeling of constantly pushing the boulder uphill with vulnerability management. You patch one thing, another pops up. It's relentless.
And they mentioned remote access servers being hit hard.
Yes, definitely a key target within that edge device category. Table 1 in the report actually lists some specific examples by vendor and CVE number. That's the unique ID for each vulnerability. Useful for tracking.
Constant vigilance indeed. Okay, another headline finding you mentioned was third-party involvement. That doubled.
It did. A really dramatic jump from 15% of breaches involving a third party last year to 30% this year.
30%? That's huge. Where's that risk coming from mainly?
Yeah.
Software vendors, service providers.
Both, primarily. Software supply chain, managed service providers, anywhere you rely on an external organization. The Snowflake incident is, well, a textbook example.
Right, that made big news. But it wasn't Snowflake itself getting breached, was it?
No, not Snowflake's core infrastructure. Attackers got in using stolen credentials belonging to Snowflake customers. And a key factor was that MFA, multi-factor authentication, wasn't mandatory for all those customer accounts.
So weak security practices by the customers opened the door using credentials stolen from somewhere else entirely.
Precisely. And the attackers weren't just stumbling around, they actually built specific tools to find and exploit Snowflake accounts that were vulnerable because of those stolen creds.
That's sophisticated.
Mm.
How many organizations got hit in that one incident?
The report estimates around 165, and here's a kicker. For about 80% of the accounts they got into, those same credentials had already been exposed somewhere else before.
80%. It just hammers home how interconnected everything is. Your vendor security, your customer security using that vendor, it all loops back.
It really does. Your attack surface now clearly extends way beyond your own walls.
And the report mentioned other big third-party incidents too, like Change Healthcare, CDK Global. These weren't just data theft, they caused massive disruption.
Exactly. Those were major business interruption events, BIRs. They caused chaos in healthcare, retail, auto dealerships. Serious real-world impact.
Even the CrowdStrike issue, which was just an availability problem, no data stolen, still huge consequences.
Absolutely. It underscores the need to really scrutinize vendor security during procurement, maybe even have plans B and C if a critical provider goes down or proves insecure repeatedly.
Positive security outcomes, as they put it. Makes sense. Okay, what about the human element? Still hovering around 60%.
Still around that mark, yeah. Though there's a small footnote. They reclassified some older ransomware cases, the ones that were just extortion without encryption, as automated. So that tweaked the number slightly compared to past years.
Okay. But the core idea is whether a person's action or mistake was kind of the deciding factor.
Exactly. Was human interaction a necessary step for the bad thing to happen, like clicking a phishing link versus a purely automated vulnerability exploit chain?
Right, and internally. What are people doing wrong or maliciously?
Well, miscellaneous errors are still the biggest category for internal actions. And the number one error, misdelivery. Sending something sensitive to the wrong person, usually via email.
The accidental email blunder.
Yeah.
Still happening all the time.
Yep. That's distinct from privilege misuse, which is intentionally abusing access you legitimately have. And the most common internal actor variety. Just regular end users making mistakes.
So training and basic controls are still super important. Okay, ransomware, always a big topic. The report says it actually overtook stolen credentials as the top action in breaches.
It did. Big shift. Ransomware was the primary action in 44% of breaches analyzed this year, up from 32% last year.
44%, that's almost half.
And it's up significantly in just overall incidents, too, not just confirmed breaches. Jumped from 14% to 31% involvement in incidents.
But interestingly, the median ransom paid went down.
It did, yeah. Dropped to $115,000 in 2024, down from $150,000 the year before.
Any theories why? Are victims just refusing to pay more often?
That seems to be a major factor. The report shows 64% of victims refused to pay in 2024. That's up quite a bit from 50% back in 2022.
So maybe the pressure is working. Or maybe the disruptions from law enforcement, like Operation Kronos against Lockbit.
Possibly a combination. Kronos definitely disrupted Lockbit, though the report does note they popped back up pretty quickly. But the underlying tactics for ransomware haven't changed that much.
Still relying on stolen creds, vulnerability exploits, phishing.
Yep. Those are still the main doors ransomware gangs use to get inside.
Which brings us back to stolen credentials. Still a huge problem, even if ransomware overtook it as the top action. What's new there?
The analysis of InfoStealer logs is pretty revealing. Malware that just vacuums up credentials from infected machines.
Yeah. What did they find?
30% of the systems compromised by InfoStealers were enterprise-licensed machines.
Okay, so corporate devices getting hit.
Right. But maybe more worrying, 46% of the compromised systems that had corporate logins on them were non-managed devices.
Meaning personal devices. BYOD gone wrong, or people breaking policy?
Likely both. Huge risk factor there when corporate credentials end up on personal, potentially less secure machines.
And you said there's a direct link between these stolen credentials from InfoStealers and ransomware attacks.
A very strong link. They found 54% of organizations hit by ransomware had their domain names show up in InfoStealer logs or for sale on dark markets before the ransomware attack happened.
Wow. So the attackers are literally buying or harvesting the keys to the kingdom beforehand.
Seems that way. And for 40% of those logs linked to ransomware victims, they contained actual corporate email addresses. It strongly suggests info stealers are feeding the ransomware pipeline.
Chilling. Okay, so credentials are still critical. But what about MFA? Isn't that supposed to stop credential abuse? Attackers are finding ways around it, aren't they?
Unfortunately, yes, MFA bypass is a growing concern. The report highlights a few key methods.
Like,
Adversary in the middle, or ATM, where they intercept the login process, password dumping from compromised machines, hijacking techniques like SIM swapping to get MFA codes sent to phones.
SIM swapping seems particularly nasty.
It is. And then there's this newer thing called prompt bombing, or MFA fatigue, just spamming the user with push notifications, hoping they'll accidentally approve one.
Just wearing them down. Have they seen that used in major attacks?
Yes, it's even been used in state-sponsored campaigns, apparently. Microsoft's data on M365 MFA bypass showed token theft is actually the most popular method right now, followed by MFA interrupt techniques and then ATM.
So MFA is good, but not infallible. What can people do about SIM swapping specifically?
The report recommends using SIM protection features from your carrier if possible. Definitely prioritize authenticator apps, those TOTP codes, over SMS codes. SMS is just more vulnerable. And crucially, user awareness about social engineering is key. Don't get tricked into helping the attacker.
Good advice. All right, shifting focus slightly. Espionage. The report mentioned vulnerability exploitation is huge there too.
Hugely important for espionage actors. Up to 70% of espionage-motivated breaches use vulnerability exploitation for initial access. Again, hitting those edge devices.
Ties right back. What else is common in espionage?
Other networking services was a top hacking vector that often relates to attackers moving laterally inside the network once they get a foothold.
Like the Salt Typhoon campaign they mentioned. That targeted telcos, including Verizon.
Exactly that kind of campaign. Espionage might be fewer breaches overall compared to financial crime, but the impact can be massive, especially against critical infrastructure or government.
And you said they're seeing more espionage motives popping up in unexpected industries. Finance, healthcare, retail.
Yeah, there was an observed increase there. It could partly be due to changes in data contributors giving better visibility into those sectors, but it's definitely a trend to watch.
And that mention of North Korean IT workers posing as others.
Right, using deception to gain employment or access, ultimately to steal data or funds for the regime, shows the human element even in nation-state activity.
Okay, the report breaks things down by industry too. You can't cover them all, but any quick highlights, say, for education or finance?
Sure. Educational services, mostly system intrusion, those miscellaneous errors we talked about, and social engineering. For finance and insurance, still lots of system intrusion, mostly financially motivated, but that uptick in espionage was notable.
And healthcare, manufacturing.
Healthcare saw system intrusion, but also this everything else category grew, possibly due to less detailed reporting sometimes. Espionage motive increased there too. Manufacturing got hit hard by malware, especially ransomware, and it was mostly SMBs affected.
Retail, still payment cards.
Less focus on payment cards, actually. More on other data types that might be easier to grab. System intrusion, social engineering, web app attacks were big patterns. And again, that increase in espionage motive.
Interesting shift away from payment data. And the report specifically contrasted SMBs versus large organizations, right? Especially with ransomware.
Yes, very stark difference. Ransomware was involved in 88% of breaches affecting SMBs. 88%, compared to only 39% for large organizations.
That's a massive disparity. SMBs are really in the crosshairs for ransomware.
Disproportionately so, yes.
What about the public sector? What are governments facing?
System intrusion, including ransomware, is now the top pattern there too, followed by web app attacks and social engineering. Ransomware is hitting all levels, local, state, federal.
And espionage is big at the federal level.
Very significant presence, yeah. And that prompt bombing tactic we mentioned earlier, that's showing up as a social engineering method against the public sector.
Okay. And regionally, you mentioned EMEA earlier, Europe, Middle East, Africa.
Right. Over half the breaches there involved malware, again, mostly ransomware, hacking and social engineering, also very common, mostly financially motivated external actors, but also a fair bit of espionage and those internal errors.
Shows the landscape varies a bit geographically. Finally, there was that interesting bit from the U.S. Secret Service in the appendix, talking about disruption.
Yeah, that was a great addition. Moving beyond just defense to actively disrupting the threat actors, They stressed understanding the attacker's operations, their motivations, what they value, so you can hit them where it hurts.
And they emphasized public-private partnership.
Absolutely. They gave an example of taking down a Russian money laundering network, which was only possible because of information shared by private companies. They really encourage businesses to work with law enforcement, like their cyber fraud task forces, for that kind of disruption effect.
Okay, so pulling it all together, the 2025 DBIR shows us, well, a threat landscape that's definitely not static.
Not at all. Key themes. Vulnerabilities in edge devices are a hot target now. Third-party risk has exploded. Ransomware is still king, but maybe victims are pushing back a bit more. MFA bypass is a real thing, and espionage is spreading its wings.
It feels like everything is more connected, more complex.
It is, which means defenses need to be holistic. You need the patching, yes, but also the vendor vetting, the user training, the incident response planning. Maybe even that law enforcement collaboration. It's all pieces of the puzzle.
And the DBIR, using Virus, is like the blueprint helping us see the whole picture. Definitely worth exploring the full report if any of these areas hit close to home for you.
Absolutely. It's an invaluable resource for understanding the risks and figuring out where to focus your efforts. Really data-driven insights.
So the final thought we want to leave you with today is this. Given everything we've discussed, the shifting tactics, the growing complexity, what's one concrete, proactive step you can take starting now to shore up your own defenses and maybe even help make the whole digital ecosystem a little bit safer? Something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us.